The galaxy had known peace for over 3,000 years. Not the kind of peace that comes from love or understanding. No, this was the peace of dominance. Fear kept the peace. The Velthari Dominion had made sure of that. Stretching across 47 star systems, commanding fleets of warships that could crack moons like eggs, the Velthari had positioned themselves as the undisputed rulers of the known galaxy. Every species that had ever looked up at the stars and dared to reach for them had eventually kneeled before the Dominion's golden banner, or been erased from existence entirely. The Kryn, a six-limbed reptilian species from the Outer Rim, had resisted once. Centuries ago, their homeworld was now an asteroid field, a reminder, a message written in rock and dust that floated endlessly through dead space. Do not resist. Do not rise. Do not dream of freedom. Supreme Commander Zithran stood at the observation deck of his flagship, the Eternal Throne, a vessel so massive it generated its own gravitational pull. Its hull was black as the void, engraved with the golden sigils of every species the Dominion had conquered. He ran one long, silver finger across the window, watching the stars. His 4 amber eyes scanned the deep black with the calm satisfaction of a being who had never once in his 300-year life felt truly threatened. His second-in-command, Admiral Vreth, approached silently. Vreth was younger, barely 120, with sharp violet features and a nervous energy that Zithran had always found mildly irritating. "Supreme Commander," Vreth said, his voice low and careful. "The deep-range scouts have returned from Sector 9. Zithran did not turn. And there is a new species, sir." Vreth paused, as if the words themselves were dangerous. "Carbon-based. Bipedal. 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs. They call themselves humans." Zithran finally turned, one thin eyebrow raised with the faintest trace of amusement. "Bipedal? 2 eyes." He made a soft sound, almost a laugh. "How many planets do they control?" Vreth swallowed. "1, sir. A single planet. They call it Earth." The Supreme Commander turned back to the stars and smiled slowly. "1 planet. 2 eyes. And they think they belong among the stars." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Send them the standard greeting protocol. Inform them of the Dominion's terms. Give them 30 of their days to submit. If they refuse..." He let the silence finish the sentence. Vreth bowed and turned to leave. "Oh, and Vreth," Zithran added quietly, "tell the scouts not to get too close. We would rather not frighten the children." Vreth nodded and walked away quickly, hiding the discomfort creeping through his chest. He had read the scouts' full report. All of it. Zithran had only read the summary. 43 light-years away, on a blue planet spinning quietly through a modest solar system, a signal arrived. It came through at 3:14 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on a cold Tuesday in November. It landed in the Deep Space Monitoring Array outside of Reykjavik, Iceland, a facility run by a joint international organization called the United Earth Defense Coalition, or UEDC. The array operator on duty that night was a 29-year-old woman named Maya Chen. She had been eating a granola bar and watching a documentary about deep-sea fish when every monitor on her station lit up simultaneously. Maya stared at her screen for a full 4 seconds before she understood what she was looking at. Then she grabbed her radio with both hands. "This is Array Station 7 to Central Command," she said, her voice perfectly steady despite her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged animal. "I need a Priority 1 line to Director Holt. Right now. Right now." There was static. Then a tired male voice. "Chun, it's 3 in the morning. I have a signal," she said. A non-terrestrial, structured, repeating signal. 18 distinct frequency bands. Mathematical sequencing in the header. This is not a pulsar. This is not background noise. She took a breath. Someone is talking to us. The line went completely silent for 3 seconds. Then, "Don't touch anything. Don't move. I'm calling the director." Within 6 hours, every major government on Earth knew. Within 12, the UEDC's full translation team, 47 linguists, mathematicians, and xenolinguistic specialists, had cracked the basic structure of the message. Within 18 hours, the full translation was sitting on the desk of UEDC Director James Holt, a broad-shouldered man from Detroit with gray temples and the kind of face that had seen too many hard decisions. He read it once, then again. Then he set it down carefully on his desk, stood up, walked to his window, and looked out at the gray morning sky over Geneva. The message was simple. It was polite. It was also the most terrifying thing he had ever read in his life. Greetings, emerging species of the third planet in Solar System KT 7731. You have been identified and catalogued by the Velthari Dominion. You are hereby informed that your system falls within Dominion-claimed space. You have 30 of your planetary rotations to submit a formal declaration of surrender and begin the process of integration. Compliance ensures survival. Resistance ensures extinction. This message is non-negotiable. The Dominion awaits your response. Director Holt pressed the intercom button on his desk. Get me the Joint Chiefs, he said quietly. And someone wake up the Secretary General.
He paused.
And get me Admiral Sarah Kane. There was a name spoken in hushed tones in every military briefing room on Earth. A name that the UEDC's enemies, in simulations, in war games, in classified threat assessments, had learned to fear even in hypothetical scenarios. Admiral Sarah Kane. But those who served under her, the men and women of the United Earth Expeditionary Fleet, had a different name for her. They called her Caro. Nobody remembered exactly how the nickname started. Some said it came from an old navigation code she used to use during her early days commanding patrol frigates on the outer edge of Earth's detection perimeter. Others said it was because, during a catastrophic training simulation in which her entire fleet had been declared destroyed by the simulator's AI, she had simply said, "Run it again." Without blinking, Caro. Keep going. Reset. Start over. Whatever its origin, the name had stuck. Caro was 54 years old. She had short silver hair cut close to the head, eyes the pale gray of a winter sea, and a jaw set like concrete. She had joined the UEDC Navy at 18. She had commanded her first ship at 29. She had never lost one. She was in the middle of a training exercise in the Pacific Fleet Simulation Bay when the emergency call came. She pulled off her tactical headset, read the message on the tablet her aide handed her, and for a long moment said absolutely nothing. Then she looked up at her aide, a young lieutenant named Marcus Webb, 26, sharp as a blade, and said in a voice completely free of panic, "Cancel the simulation. Full fleet assembly. I want every ship captain in the briefing room in 4 hours." "Admiral," Marcus said carefully, "the message says 30 days. They gave us 30 days, Caro said, already walking. "I'm not using 30 days to write a surrender note." She handed the tablet back to him, without looking. "I'm using 30 days to build something they've never seen before." Marcus looked at the tablet. Then, as she walked away, he was behind her. "SYMJHY," he thought, a phrase his grandmother used, one that meant, from now on, nothing will be the same. He didn't understand why it came to him right then, but it did. He ran to catch up with the Admiral. The 30 days that followed were the most intense in human history. Every shipyard on Earth, and on the 7 orbital stations that ringed the planet like a mechanical crown, went to full wartime production. Sleep became a luxury. Food was eaten standing up over keyboards between calculations. Engineers who had spent their careers building deep space freighters and civilian transport vessels were handed new schematics and told simply, build faster. The UEDC had been preparing for the possibility of first contact for decades. Not necessarily hostile contact, but the possibility. And that preparation now revealed itself in quiet, stunning ways. Weapon systems that existed only in classified files were suddenly being assembled. Drive systems, once deemed theoretical 6 months ago, were now being installed in ships that were finishing ahead of schedule. Materials science that the public knew nothing about. Armor composites tested in secret for 11 years, energy absorption plating, layered hull systems designed specifically to absorb and redirect energy weapon fire. All of it was suddenly being bolted onto ships that were growing in orbital dry dock like mechanical flowers opening in fast forward. Caro barely slept. She lived in the command center of Fleet Station 1, above Earth's northern hemisphere, surrounded by holographic ship schematics and tactical maps. She drank black coffee. She ate protein bars. She reviewed every design decision personally. The Velthari used directed energy weapons, she told her engineering chief, a heavyset Texan named Dr. Robert Bobby Garza, during one of their late-night sessions. Every intercept we've decoded from their scout probes confirms it. High-frequency particle beams. Effective, precise, fast. Bobby nodded, rubbing his eyes. So, what are you thinking? Caro turned to the holographic display of the hull design rotating slowly before them. I'm thinking, she said softly, that they've never fought an enemy that uses kinetic weapons. Bobby stared at her. Not at this scale, she continued. This is not effective against ships that have layered composite armor designed to deflect their beam frequencies. Not against a species that has spent 100 years of warfare on a single planet, where resources are limited, where you can't always outspend your enemy, so you learn to be clever. Bobby was quiet for a moment. Then a slow grin spread across his face. You're going to give them something they don't know how to calculate for. Caro looked at the rotating ship. I'm going to give them something they've never seen in 3,000 years of ruling the galaxy. She picked up her coffee cup. I'm going to give them us. Meanwhile, in the diplomatic wing of the UEDC Tower in Geneva, Director Holt was crafting humanity's official response to the Dominion. It was 3 sentences long. His communications advisor had argued for something longer, something more careful, more diplomatic. Holt had said no. 3 sentences were enough. He sent it on day 29. We have received your message. We are not interested in surrender. We will meet you at the coordinates of your choosing. On the morning of day 30, as the Velthari Dominion awaited what they fully expected to be a groveling capitulation from a primitive two-eyed species barely capable of interstellar travel, something extraordinary was happening in the silence of space above Earth. A fleet was forming. Not a large fleet by Dominion standards. The Velthari could deploy thousands of warships when they chose to, gleaming, massive, powered by energy systems that could power entire cities for centuries. By comparison, humanity's fleet was modest in number. 47 ships in total. But they were not what anyone expected. The flagship of the fleet was a vessel designated UEDS Resolute, United Earth Defense Ship Resolute, and it was unlike anything humanity had ever built before. 800 meters long. Layered hull armor is 12 meters thick at the forward sections and composed of a tungsten carbide composite that has taken 11 years of classified research to perfect. 4 primary drive engines mounted in a reinforced rear cradle that could push the ship to 60% of light speed in open space. 12 secondary maneuvering thrusters that could rotate the entire vessel 360 degrees in under 8 seconds. A central weapons spine running the full length of the ship that housed what the engineers called, with characteristic human understatement, the package. Caro stood on the bridge of the Resolute and looked out at her fleet through the forward viewport. 46 other ships floated in neat formation behind her, destroyers, frigates, carriers, and 4 vessels that the UEDC had classified simply as breach class and refused to describe further in any document that might be intercepted. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood beside her. He had asked to be assigned to the Resolute personally. Caro had approved it without comment, which he had learned was her version of a compliment. They're not going to believe our cargo is all we brought, Marcus said, looking at the fleet. Good, Caro said. It's going to make them underestimate us. Better. Marcus looked at her. And when will they stop underestimating us? Caro's jaw tightened slightly, the closest thing she ever showed to a smile. Then it'll be too late for them to do anything about it. She turned to the communications officer, a young woman named Diana Reyes. Open a channel to the fleet. Channel open, Admiral. Caro clasped her hands behind her back, a habit an anchor, and spoke. This is Admiral Kane speaking to all ships. In a few hours, we will make history. Not the kind written by kings and politicians. The kind written by the people who stood at the edge of everything unknown and did not blink. She paused. They sent us a message that said compliance ensures survival. I want you to remember that. Remember what they thought of us before they knew us. Because today we show them who we are. Her voice dropped just slightly, but it carried across every ship in the fleet with absolute clarity. Every ship, all hands. We go forward. The response from 47 ships came back as one voice. For Earth. The Velthari Dominion had selected a meeting point at the edge of the Orion Nebula, 3 light-years from Earth. A calculated choice. Close enough to be intimidating. It is far enough that humanity would need to travel through unfamiliar space to reach it, hopefully arriving disoriented and already psychologically diminished. Supreme Commander Zethran had brought 230 warships. He had not brought them because he was afraid. He had brought them because he wanted humanity to see the full weight of what they were refusing. A visual argument. An overwhelming, unanswerable display of power that would collapse whatever foolish pride had led these creatures to decline the standard surrender protocol. He stood at the bridge of the Eternal Throne, surrounded by 40 of his finest officers, when the long-range sensors lit up. The humans are arriving, the sensor officer reported. Zethran turned to face the main display screen. How many ships? A pause. 47, Supreme Commander. The bridge was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, the silence broke, not with alarm but with laughter. Soft at first, then genuine. Officers glanced at each other with wide amber eyes, shoulders shaking with barely contained amusement. Even Zethran allowed himself a long, quiet exhale that carried the weight of 200 years of absolute certainty. 47, he repeated, his voice rich with contempt. They brought 47 ships. He looked at Admiral Vreth. We outnumber them nearly 5 to 1. And our ships are... Sir. The sensor officer's voice had changed. Something in it made Zethran stop. What? I'm having difficulty getting clean readings on their vessels. The officer's 4 fingers moved rapidly over the display. Their hulls are refracting our sensor pulses. I cannot determine weapons load, energy output, or internal configuration. Zethran frowned. Recalibrate. I have recalibrated, sir. 3 times. The officer looked up, and for the first time in a very long time, Zethran saw something in a junior officer's eyes that he had not seen directed at an enemy in centuries. Uncertainty. Their hull material is something I have not encountered before, the officer said quietly. It is scattering our active sensor bands across 17 frequencies, simultaneously. I cannot see inside those ships, sir. The laughter on the bridge had stopped. Zethran stared at the main display, where the human fleet floated in perfect, silent formation. 47 ships. Smaller than his. Fewer than his. And yet, they knew, Admiral Vreth said softly beside him. They knew we'd scan them the moment they arrived. They built their hulls to blind us. Zethran's 4 eyes narrowed. Open a communication channel, he said. His voice was still calm, controlled. But something beneath it had shifted, some very old, very buried instinct that 3,000 years of unchallenged power some has succeeded in killing entirely. Something that whispered, "Be careful." The communication channel opened with a crisp, clean signal, something the Dominion's officers noted immediately, because primitive species usually broadcast on messy, unstable frequencies. This signal was sharp, structured, and encoded with a layered security protocol that their decryption systems would need several minutes to unravel. Several minutes. This was a species that had supposedly never made first contact before. The face that appeared on the Eternal Throne's main display screen was a human female. Silver hair, gray eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. She wore a dark uniform with a single emblem on the chest, a blue sphere with 2 cross lines through it. She looked at Zethran the way a surgeon looks at a patient. Clinically. Without fear. Without awe. Supreme Commander Zethran, she said. Her translator rendered it perfectly in Velthari standard. I'm Admiral Sarah Kane, United Earth Defense Coalition. Thank you for choosing a meeting point. Zethran recovered quickly. He was, whatever else he was, a supreme commander of 3,000 years of imperial tradition. He did not let things show on his face. Admiral Kane, he said smoothly, the title carrying the faintest trace of mockery. I note that you have brought 47 ships to face 230. I admire the commitment. Numbers aren't everything, Caro said simply. In war, Zethran replied, they usually are. In the kinds of war you've fought, she said, they usually were. She tilted her head very slightly, a gesture Zethran's behavioral analysts would later describe as calm provocation. I'd like to ask you something, Supreme Commander. In 3,000 years of expansion, how many species have fought back? Zethran blinked a slow, deliberate blink. Many have tried. How many have succeeded in hurting you? A pause. Barely half a second. But it was there. None, he said. Then you have no data on what that feels like, Caro said. Which means, with respect, you have no idea what you're walking into. The bridge of the Eternal Throne was utterly silent. Officers had stopped pretending to work. Every set of amber eyes was fixed on the screen. Zethran leaned forward slightly in his command chair. Are you threatening the Dominion, Admiral?
No, she said.
I'm explaining something to you. There's a difference. She glanced down briefly, checking something on her own display, and then looked back up. We didn't come here to fight. We came here because you gave us coordinates and told us to show up. So, we showed up.
She paused.
But I want you to understand something before the conversation goes any further. We are not the Kryn. We are not the species that used to live in the area of the asteroid field near the Outer Rim. We are human beings. We have spent 100,000 years surviving things that should have killed us. Ice ages.
Plagues.
Wars that nearly ended our entire civilization, wars we started ourselves. We are, by any reasonable measure, the most aggressively persistent species in the known galaxy. Her gray eyes were absolutely steady. We are not afraid of you. Zethran stared at her for a long moment. Then he closed the channel. He sat perfectly still for 10 seconds. Then he turned to his weapons officer with a cold, controlled expression that had decided the fate of dozens of worlds. Target their flagship, he said. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be studied by military historians, human and alien alike, for the next 200 years. The Velthari opened fire first. 18 of Zethran's warships discharged their primary particle beam arrays simultaneously, a coordinated burst of directed energy fire that, against any other opponent in the known galaxy, would have resulted in the immediate vaporization of multiple vessels. The beams were precisely aimed. The targeting was perfect. The energy output was, by any reasonable calculation, more than sufficient to destroy the Resolute 3 times over. The beams hit, and the Resolute did not explode. It shuddered. Warning lights flickered across its hull in a brief, brilliant cascade. But the layered composite armor, 11 years in development, dismissed as theoretical by half of Earth's engineering community right up until the moment it proved them wrong, absorbed the initial burst, dispersed the energy laterally through the hull matrix, and radiated 60% of it harmlessly into space. The Resolute rocked, but it held. On the bridge, Caro gripped the armrest of her command chair with one hand. A small cut had opened above her left eyebrow from the impact shockwave. She touched it, looked at the blood on her fingers for exactly 1 second, and looked back up. Damage report, she said. Hull integrity at 83%, Marcus reported, his voice perfectly controlled. Forward armor sections holding. No internal breaches. Power systems nominal. Good. Caro looked at her weapons officer, a compact, quiet man named Lieutenant Commander David Park. Mr. Park. Admiral. The package. David Park turned to his console. His hands moved with the careful precision of someone who had trained for this exact moment for 3 years. Admiral. Activating primary kinetic array. What the Dominion sensors had been unable to read, what the sensor-scattering hull had successfully hidden from every Velthari scan since the moment the human fleet arrived, was the Resolute's primary weapon system. Not an energy weapon. Not a particle beam. Not anything that 3,000 years of Dominion warfare had taught them to expect or defend against. 16 electromagnetic mass accelerators, each one running the full length of the ship's central spine. Each one is capable of launching a tungsten carbide penetrator rod, 2 meters long, 20 centimeters in diameter, at 40% of the speed of light. They were, in the simplest possible terms, guns. Enormous, terrifyingly powerful, physically simple guns. The Dominion's energy shields, designed specifically to deflect, absorb, and redirect particle beams and plasma-based weapons, had absolutely no protocol for stopping 16 physically solid objects traveling at 40% of light speed. David Park was fired. The first salvo from the Resolute alone crossed the distance to the nearest Velthari warship in just over 2 seconds. All 16 rounds hit within a 3-meter spread. The warship, a vessel 700 meters long, crewed by 400 Velthari officers, lasted approximately 1 additional second before it ceased to exist as a coherent structure. The rest of the human fleet opened fire simultaneously. What followed was not, by any traditional definition, a battle. A battle implies two roughly matched forces exchanging blows. What happened at the edge of the Orion Nebula for the next 40 minutes was something different, a systematic, calculated, brutal education delivered by 47 ships to 230. The Velthari had superiority in numbers. They had superiority in energy output. They had 3,000 years of unbroken combat experience against dozens of species. What they did not have, what they had never needed and therefore never developed, was a counter to kinetic weapons at relativistic speeds. Their shields were tuned to energy. Their evasive protocols were designed around the travel time of beam weapons. Their damage control systems were built to handle the specific types of wounds that energy fire inflicts on a hull. Nothing in their doctrine, their training, or their 3,000 years of institutional military knowledge had prepared them for such an encounter. The human fleet did not fight like the Velthari expected. They did not charge forward in a line. They did not attempt to match an energy weapon with another energy weapon. Instead, they did something that Zethran, watching from the bridge of the Eternal Throne as his sensor screens lit up with destruction faster than his officers could process it, could only describe in the stunned silence of his own mind as chaotic. They spread. The 47 ships broke formation the instant the shooting started, scattering across a 300,000-kilometer sphere of space, moving in ways that his targeting systems struggled to predict because their behavior patterns matched nothing in the Dominion's combat database. They feinted. They drew fire from one direction while another ship came in from completely opposite angles. They used the nebula's interference, its charged particle clouds and electromagnetic noise, in ways his navigators called impossible, threading lanes through the gas clouds that his pilots would never have risked. And they kept firing. Every ship continuously. The kinetic rounds came from every direction. They came too fast to track. They came at angles that his shields had never been asked to cover because no enemy had ever attacked from that geometry before. Caro watched it all from the bridge of the Resolute, which had absorbed 3 more energy weapon strikes and was down to 71% hull integrity but was still moving, still firing, still in the fight. "Breach-class units," she said into her tactical comm, "engage Protocol 7. On the far edge of the formation, the 4 Breach-class ships, vessels that the UEDC had refused to describe in any interceptable document, activated their primary systems for the first time in actual combat. They were not warships in the conventional sense. They were delivery systems. Each one carried 12 missiles that could be aimed separately, not energy weapons or plasma charges, but heavy tungsten missiles with straightforward guidance systems that couldn't be disrupted by any electronic interference in the galaxy, since they didn't need electronic signals to work. Each missile weighed 40 tons. Each one was traveling at 35% of light speed when it impacted. When 12 of them hit the Eternal Throne simultaneously, the flagship of the Velthari Dominion, a vessel that had crushed civilizations, that had orbited dying worlds as their populations were absorbed into the Empire, that had never in its 400-year history taken so much as a serious hull breach from an enemy action, went dark. Not destroyed. Caro had given specific orders about that.
Dark. Powered down.
Dead in space.
Crippled.
Within 3 minutes of the breach-class engagement, 41 Velthari warships had been destroyed. 67 had been disabled. The remaining 122 were attempting to withdraw, their formations shattered, their communications in chaos, their commanders trying to process a reality that everything they had ever known told them was impossible. Caro keyed her fleet-wide channel. All ships, cease fire. Let them go. The galaxy listened. Every species with a deep space communication array, every intelligence network worth its name, and every diplomat and warlord and merchant prince in 47 star systems picked up pieces of what had happened at the Orion Nebula. The recordings, the sensor data. The frantic Velthari communication traffic leaked through damaged relay buoys like blood from a wound. They listened and they processed, and in the long silence that followed, something fundamental shifted. The way weight shifts in a room when the largest person in it suddenly falls. The Velthari had lost. Not been pushed back. I have not been forced to draw.
Lost.
41 ships destroyed in 40 minutes by a species that had, until 30 days ago, been considered too primitive to bother classifying above Category 3 in the Dominion Species Threat Index. On the disabled Eternal Throne, drifting in the faint glow of the Orion Nebula with half his officers injured and his power systems running on emergency reserves, Supreme Commander Zethran sat in his command chair and said nothing for a very long time. Admiral Vreth stood beside him. His face was composed, but his hands, all 4 of them, were shaking. "They're hailing us," a communications officer said quietly. Zethran stared straight ahead. "Put it through." Caro's face appeared on the cracked display screen. She looked exactly as she had before the battle, composed, steady, with that same surgical gaze. The cut above her eyebrow had been bandaged. Other than that, she appeared entirely undisturbed. "Supreme Commander," she said, "your crew will be safe. We have no interest in prisoners. We have no interest in expanding your empire's territory. We have no interest in revenge for the species you've destroyed." She paused just a moment. "We have one interest. Your Dominion understands something very clearly. Of SYMJHY, from this day forward, the rules of this galaxy have changed. Humanity is not a species to be categorized and cataloged and given surrender terms. We are a species that you will deal with as equals, as peers. As a civilization, we have the same right to the stars as any other." Zethran looked at her for a long time. "You could have destroyed us," he said finally. His voice, for the first time in 300 years, was not entirely controlled. "The Breach-class ships, the missiles, you had the capability. You chose not to." "Yes." "Why?" Caro's expression didn't change. "Because we're not you," she said simply. Another long silence. "What do you want?" Zethran asked. And the question, from a being who had never once in his life asked another species for anything, cost him dearly. Everyone on both bridges could hear it. "A conversation," Caro said. "A real one. Without surrender terms. Without ultimatums." She leaned forward slightly. "You've spent 3,000 years adding names to your conquered list. We're not interested in being added, but we might be interested in being partners. If you're capable of that." The bridge of the Eternal Throne was absolutely silent. Vreth looked at Zethran. Zethran looked at the screen. The galaxy listened. The negotiations that followed took place aboard the Resolute. Zethran had expected to feel humiliated, walking through the corridors of a human warship, a ship of a species he had dismissed as primitive barely 30 days ago. He had expected the indignity of it to sit in his chest like a stone. But as he moved through those corridors, escorted by 2 human soldiers who were professionally courteous and completely unintimidated by his 2-meter Velthari frame, something else moved in him instead.
Curiosity.
The ship was different from anything he had seen. Efficient without being elegant. Functional without being bare. The corridors were lined, in places, with photographs, images of people he didn't recognize, printed on physical paper and fixed to the walls with small metallic pins. Humans in ordinary clothes. Humans laughing. Families. Cities. Oceans. Mountains. A child standing in a field of yellow flowers, looking up at a sky that was the same blue as the planet he'd seen in the scout's report. He stopped in front of one photograph without meaning to. A middle-aged woman, standing on what appeared to be a bridge over a wide river, smiling at the camera with her eyes half closed against the sun. "What is this?" he asked the soldier beside him. The soldier, a young man no older than 25, gazed at the photograph. Crew photos, sir. The Admiral has them put up in every section of the ship. She says it reminds everyone what they're fighting for. Zithran looked at the photograph for another long moment. In 300 years, it had never once occurred to him to ask his crews what they were fighting for. They fought for the Dominion. That was sufficient. That was everything. He continued walking. The meeting room was smaller than he'd expected. A long table. Chairs designed for human proportions. A human aide had quietly provided larger ones for the Velthari delegation, a detail so thoughtful that it caught Zithran off guard more than the missiles had. Kara was already seated when he arrived. She stood when he entered, not in submission, but in the straightforward courtesy of one commander acknowledging another. They sat across from each other. Director Holt was on a communication link from Earth, observing. Marcus Webb sat to Kara's right, taking notes. Vreth sat to Zithran's left, visibly uncomfortable in a way he was struggling to hide. "I want to ask you something," Zithran said, before any formal agenda had been introduced. He had decided on the walk here that he would not pretend to procedural comfort he didn't feel. The photographs in the corridor. The child is in the field. You carry your people's faces on your warship. Kara looked at him. Yes.
Why?
She considered the question, not dismissively, but genuinely. She approached the question with genuine consideration, as though it warranted a meaningful response. Because the people who make decisions about war should never be too comfortable, she said. It's easy to move pieces on a map. It's harder when you can see the faces of what the pieces represent. She glanced toward the corridor. Every person in those photos is someone's whole world. I think that's worth remembering. Zithran was quiet for a moment. We have conquered 47 systems, he said, slowly. Absorbed hundreds of species. We have never, he stopped. Started again. I have never thought about it in those terms. I know, Kara said. Not accusatory. It was merely a factual statement. Does that disgust you? She looked at him steadily. It concerns me, she said. Disgust doesn't get us anywhere productive. Vreth leaned forward slightly. You said something in your transmission. HFY. What does that mean? Our translators flagged it as untranslatable. Marcus Webb smiled slightly at his notepad. Caro glanced at Marcus, a brief acknowledgement, and then looked back at the Velthari. It's a phrase from one of Earth's many languages. It means something like, from this moment, I choose to be different. From now on, things change. She paused. It's what someone says when they're done with the old way of doing things. The room was quiet. Zithran looked at his hands, long, silver, four-fingered, holding 3 centuries of imperial certainty. Then he set them flat on the table. What are your terms? He asked. No conquest, Caro said. Of anyone. Any species in your domain that wants to renegotiate their status, you allow it. She held up a hand before he could speak. Not immediately. Not all at once. But the direction of things changes. The Dominion becomes something different, an alliance, maybe. A council. Something where other voices matter. She looked at him directly. You have 3,000 years of infrastructure, knowledge, and reach. That's not worthless. We're not asking you to collapse. We're asking you to evolve. Zithran looked at her for a long, long moment. And if I refuse, he asked. Not as a threat, as a genuine question. Then we'll be back, she said. And we won't ask to talk first. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Zithran did something that Admiral Vreth, who had served under him for 80 years, had never once seen him do. He nodded. 6 months later, the first meeting of what would eventually be called the Orion Accord took place on a neutral station above the gas giant Tyron 4, at the edge of Dominion space. 12 species were represented. 2 of them, the Mreth and the Solani, were former Dominion subjects attending under newly renegotiated terms. 3 others were entirely new contacts, drawn out of cautious isolation by the news of what had happened at the nebula. Caro attended in her admiral's uniform. She sat at the table between a six-limbed Mreth diplomat named Sara and a Solonai elder whose name translated, roughly, as one who waited long. Zethran sat 3 seats down. He looked different, not smaller but somehow less armored, the way people look when they've made a decision they've been afraid of making for a long time. Before the formal session opened, Sarah leaned toward Caro and spoke in a voice so quiet it barely existed. "My people had given up," she said, her 6 limbs folded close. "We had stopped believing that anything would ever change. We called it permanent darkness. 300 years in the permanent dark." Caro listened. She didn't offer reassurance quickly. She let the weight of those words exist for a moment before she responded. "The dark doesn't last," she said finally. "It just feels like it does." Sarah's large compound eyes blinked slowly. "How did your people hold on to that? Through everything?" Caro thought about it, genuinely thought about it, the way she approached every question worth answering. She thought about the photographs on the corridors of the Resolute, the child in the yellow field, the woman squinting into the sun on a bridge above a wide river. She thought about Marcus Webb running to catch up with her on the day they'd received the Dominion's message, and the look on his face, not fear, but something more complicated and more honest than fear. "We're stubborn," she said simply. "It's a species thing." Sarah made a sound that her translator rendered as laughter. Real, surprised, genuine laughter. Across the table, Zethran heard it. He looked up. His 4 amber eyes found Caro's gray ones for a moment. She gave him the smallest nod. He returned it. In the years that followed, the Orion Accord grew. Slowly. Not without friction. There were setbacks, violations, and moments when old habits reasserted themselves and the whole structure seemed on the edge of collapse. There were nights when Caro sat alone in her cabin on the Resolute and wondered if she had asked too much of creatures shaped by 3,000 years of absolute power. Wondered if evolution worked that fast. But it did. Slowly. Unevenly. The journey proceeded, taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It did. The galaxy did not become a paradise. It became something more real than that, a place where different kinds of minds, shaped by different histories and different kinds of suffering, were learning, not without difficulty, not without failure, to sit at the same table. And it had started because 47 ships showed up when 230 expected surrender. It had started because a woman with silver hair and gray eyes and a jaw like concrete had looked at a message that said compliance ensures survival and had thought, not today. HFY, MJHY. From this moment, things change. And